everybody. And thank you, Irene. So, as you know, like the topic of our event, of the community event, but also here for the public conference, is misinformation. So also our second panel will be about misinformation, but we will go a little bit deeper. Like, what are the different types of misinformation, and what are the overlappings, I'm sorry, to intersex issues. For that, I'm very happy to introduce you to our panelists. And I'm starting with Vanessa Varga. Vanessa Varga is intersex activist and co-chair from Interaction Switzerland, as well as the consultant on intersex and sport for OII Europe. Urs has personal experience years ago what it means to stop competitive sport because of her variation, her intersex variation, and since then she's dedicating her work to fight against discrimination and human rights violation in sport, especially coming from Switzerland, where most of the sport bodies are. She tries to work there and to build a network and also to change their mind setting, hopefully. Exactly. So, welcome, Wes. The second person is Matt, pronoun they, them, intersex activist in France and member of the collective. I'm very sorry, I'm not saying the collective name in French because that would not work. So I'm saying OII France. Welcome, Matt. Matt is working mainly on community development and collaboration with French administration and institutions. They are involved in the queer community in Paris, where they live and also used to be involved in the queer and feminist student organizations. And at the moment, trying to survive their PhD in civil engineering. Welcome, Matt. Our third speaker will be Rodrigo Cruz. Rodrigo Cruz is a political sociologist, a PhD in sociology at the Nova University of Lisbon, and scientific collaborator at the University Libre de Brussels. So, yeah. He has more than a decade experience, research experience on social movements, especially on in the LGBTIQ plus movement, gender and sexuality, digital technologies, and international politics. And he was also awarded because of his work as a journalist, honored with the Brazil's most prestigious journalism and human rights award, the Vladimir Herzog Award. Especially invited have we Rodrigo because he worked, he was an expert on the ILGA Europe's research or paper or study, I don't know exactly how to say it, on the topic of foreign misinformation manipulation and interference targeting, especially the LGBT IQ community. Welcome, Rodrigo. And we have already heard our fourth speaker. I'm very happy to welcome again Michael van Gelderen, is a human rights officer at the Human Rights Office in Geneva and leads there the team working on human rights, gender identity, sex characteristics, and sexual orientation. Welcome, everybody. and to our panel.
Can you turn up your audio, please?
So, as we are all sitting in the same room, we need to work out our audio a little bit. So I just get informed that I need to turn on my audio now. So, okay. Welcome everybody. I think we step in the first question, if everybody of you is okay. And we will start with Rodrigo, because when we have an expert here, we also want to ask you, of course, if you can explain a little bit FIMI, because a lot of the people, or also me in the beginning, I didn't know what that mean. So it would be really nice if you can explain that a little bit. And then going further on the topic of the intersectionality of discrimination from intersex athletes at what the athletes at the Olympics faced.
Okay, thank you very much. First, just a while, yes, because I'm trying to share the presentation, but I think I need authorization.
I am so sorry. I am allowing you to share your screen right now. I'm so sorry, Zoom, as always, given surprises. Okay, should all work now.
It's working now. Okay. Thanks, Irene. So first of all, thank you. I would like to thank everyone who's present. I would like to thank for the invitation. I think it's important to say that I am not an expert in intersex issues, but really honored and happy to be here today. It has been a great opportunity also to try to delve into the subject and try to make connections with my current subject of research, which is information on LGBTQ issues and the regulation of social media platforms. Thanks again. And as Luan just said, I think it's really important to start maybe providing some the concepts that are really important for the debate in this field when we are talking about disinformation, misinformation, malinformation. It can be sometimes confusing, and as one also said, some institutions, some researchers now are even proposing new concepts as FIMI. I'm going to explain what FIMI is. So let's start first in providing this conceptual clarification. So to start with disinformation, right? So disinformation is some sort of intentional falsehood that is spread as news stories or simulated documentary formats to advance some political goals. So what is important about disinformation is to understand that in the public debate, we normally hear about it as fake news, okay? Like fake news is the most used term in the media, in the politics, but fake news tend to portray the issue as just being something sporadic, something that is random, confused, and don't have any sort of intention or political intention behind it. So disinformation has been proposed for researchers and policymakers to clarify the fact that disinformation is not something random. It's something systematic, it's something that has normally some sort of political goal behind it. So here I am just bringing a few examples. As Luan said, I live in Belgium, so it was easier to me to think about the first thing that happens, where I live. But it's something that's happening everywhere, so it's not difficult to think about it. I thought about the disinformation campaign against the comprehensive sexual education program in the French-speaking Belgium last year that led to protest led to 4 schools that were burned in the region of Charleroi because parents thought that children were being taught about sex at schools. And this Evras was the name of the program, was actually just some sort of harmonization of a policy that already existed before. But for some reason, some people realized that it was going to be voted in the parliament, this more official, harmonized version of Evras, and then it became something big, something even dangerous. And we even had this protest last year in Brussels with about 300, 400 people, like with all sorts of actors that you've never imagined it working together before. So here we have misinformation that is in the title of this panel. And what is important to know about misinformation is that it's closely related to disinformation, but it's just something that we share without necessarily having malicious intent. So a good example of it was the first weeks of the COVID pandemic, when we didn't have enough, information, like reliable information about COVID. And maybe some of us even shared information that was not reliable. So some really silly example that I found about COVID in a study this week was this people sharing information about first toilet papers in supermarket were gone. And then after people sharing information about, no, actually some sort of scientists said that the toilet paper was infected. Because some of them were produced in Asia, and people were going back to supermarkets to give back the toilet paper. But a lot of people shared this. I saw that on my Facebook, for example, some from US, some from Brazil. But this is misinformation. We are all vulnerable to share information that is not checked. Then we have malinformation that refers to deliberate sharing of genuine information, but to cause harm. But we all had these WikiLeaks waves some years ago. I brought this example of the emails of personal emails of Emmanuel Macron that were leaked in France in the elections of 2017. But some of them were not really personal, but anyway, like it's some sort of operation, or it can be, of course, something, some sort of hacker or political group that use information to cause harm to someone or to a group of people. We also have gender disinformation, which I do not believe that it's just a subset of disinformation. That attacks women identities or seek to undermine feminism. I also think that it's a dimension of most of the disinformation campaigns that we see nowadays. I think if we stop to think, we can find gendered dimensions in disinformation, in most of the disinformation campaigns that we see nowadays. But this concept was indeed created for scholars that study disinformation that targets women in politics specifically. That's where it came from. So here I just brought like 2 examples. Maia Sandu, which is the president of Moldova, that is constantly targeted, but we could talk about many examples like Dilma Rousseff in Brazil, or Hillary Clinton in the US, or Brigitte Macron in France, that are constantly victim of this type of attack. Just to before moving forward and to talk about FIMI, I think it's also important to promote some kind of disambiguation between disinformation, malinformation. As I said before, the main difference is between the falseness and the intent to harm. And disinformation is very central in this field because it brings together the falseness and the intent to cause harm. And then we have FIMI, which is a bit like disinformation, but with a sort of a scale that is bigger, that is transnational. and is coordinated by state or state-affiliated actors. So before going to FIMI, I think it's also important to make a difference between two groups of behaviors that are constantly confused in the debate, because disinformation, misinformation, malinformation, gender disinformation, and FIMI are related to communication, and I would say even propaganda methods that are not necessarily illegal. And it's different of hateful and threatening and violent behaviors that are mostly illegal, that are hate crime, hate speech and harassment. So of course, we can always try to promote links between these kinds of behaviors. Of course, that disinformation campaigns are fueling hate speech and it can lead to hate crime, but there is some sort of legal difference between these types of behavior. Okay, Rodrigo, what's FIMI? So I think before talking about FIMI, it's important to say that the information is taking the scale of the information nowadays is related to the tensions that we are seeing in the geopolitical landscape. So it's a very polarized scenario where the false narratives about gender, women's rights, LGBTIQ people become also an instrument, a very powerful instrument of manipulation, and an instrument of political interference and attacks on democracy. So an example of these tensions that we see nowadays are, for example, the tensions between Russia and European Union and the US, or in the context, for example, of the war in Ukraine or what's happening in Palestine right now, in Lebanon, etc. So here I brought just like some examples already related to Olympics. You can see this fake news, this is information from last year about this rainbow kind of installation, the Arc de Triomphe in Paris. And here we have this sort of map of the Russian disinformation ecosystem operating worldwide. So all kinds of media outlets, channels that are linked to the Kremlin, to the Russian corporations, to the Orthodox Church, and some of them have even been forbidden in the European Union since 2022. Okay. So finally, I'm so sorry about this. Okay. So to address this type of disinformation that has this transnational scale and is coordinated sometimes even by state actors, there are some institutions that have proposed this concept of FIMI, which means foreign information manipulation and interference. So what is FIMI? The concept refers to a mostly non-illegal pattern of behavior that is manipulative in character, conducted in an intentional and coordinated manner. So actors of such activity can be state and non-state actors, including their proxies inside and outside of their own territory. What is crucial and sometimes even a bit controversial about the concept of FIMI is that, and you're probably questioning right now, Rodrigo, how can I know that some sort of disinformation comes from outside of my country? Like, how can I really attest that it comes from the Kremlin? Well, it is difficult, of course. The EAS, the European External Action Service, which is one of the institutions that have proposed the concept of FIMI, they have specific frameworks to analyze disinformation campaigns and to identify not only the targets, but also who are the authors, the perpetrators of this campaign. So this is, of course, an extremely difficult work that there are researchers, experts that are working specifically on it and also trying to constantly improve these frameworks. But what they are trying to prove here is that it's possible to work with evidence and prove that some kind of content were produced for specific actors with specific intentions to reach specific goals. But also, FIMI is not just like Russia with like power to produce disinformation in several languages and spread it worldwide. It also interacts with the tensions of specific territories. So like FIMI targeting some situation in France will also interact with local actors that are interested actually in those narratives, and they will themselves help to spread it. So the boundaries between what comes from outside and what is domestic disinformation are not easy to draw. It's very difficult to draw the line. So then we come to FIMI target LGBTIQ plus people. So last year I had the opportunity to work with the European External Action Service in a specific report about FIMI targeting LGBTIQ people. And we kind of worked with evidence and tried to put together a concept of this specific type subsection of FIMI. Of course, it happened because EAS was conscious about the relevance of narratives targeting LGBTIQ people. And also because like there was some sort of question like why this type of narrative is so popular and becoming so instrumentalized in politics and in geopolitics. Here are some highlights of the report. This image comes from the report. We worked with 31 FIMI cases in different regions, mostly in Eastern Europe, Central Asia, and the north of Africa. At this point, we didn't find a specific case. The research was from last year, so we didn't find specific cases on intersex issues. Trans, gay, and lesbian communities were the most common targets. We found 9 sorts of LGBTIQ events in 9 different EU languages and 15 unique languages. Here are some cases of FIMI that we found in this research last year. So some very interesting ones, for example, and with different techniques. I think this is what is important about FIMI and information campaigns in general, is that it's not only about like a fake journalistic article trying to imitate like a real journalistic article, but also we found campaigns about putting European soldiers in dating apps or NATO officers in gay apps with their real emails, actually using their real emails, institutional emails, to say that, okay, NATO and EU officers are all like gays, and that's why this whole thing about Ukraine and Russia is Europe trying to spread LGBTIQ ideology here. Also like this kind of like job advertisement, looking for a mentor on tolerance for the front in the Ukraine war. And this last one is in Central Africa, is some sort of false propaganda of a French beer that is kind of popular in Central Africa, but advertising to gay men kissing. So trying to say that this a beer that comes from Europe actually comes from France, is some sort of like gay-friendly beer. So here we arrive on intersex issues and how disinformation and FIMI intersect with sport and intersex issues. This year we had a case that is, in my opinion, paradigmatic of this subject. It was the case of the Olympic champion Iman Khalif, and I think there was enough media discussion about this case, but I think it's worth to bring it again. So Iman Khalif won a women's boxing match in only 46 seconds after Italy's Angela Carini decided to stop fighting. And she had been punched so hard by Khalif that she was in too much pain to continue, according to the coach of Angela herself. But then a narrative repeated by J.K. Rowling and Donald Trump and other personalities in the media led the public to believe that Khalif was a secretly man. And the Boston Globe even published a headline, a misleading headline in print referring to her as a transgender boxer. And they later issued an apology and a correction, but also like Fox News and other personalities called Khalif and the Taiwanese boxer Yu Ting biologically men on air. But the reality, however, is that Khalif and Yu Ting are not transgender, nor are they secretly men. Iman Khalif was born female and cleared by the International Olympic Committee. But despite the widespread debates over transgender women participating in women's sport, there were actually no transgender women competing in Paris Olympics this year. There is, of course, lots of details, and this was not a simple case to cover. But for example, there is a very interesting article in the EU Disinfo, which is the platform of EAS, the European External Action Service, about how some of those narratives about Iman were also female cases, because Iman had previous competition in Beijing last year, where she was fighting against a Russian fighter. And because she won this fight, there was some also kind of commotion in Russia about Iman and about the gender identity, or the allegedly gender identity of Iman. So to uncover the complexity of this case, I think it's necessary to understand that the intersectionality of false narratives. These false narratives are often playing with gender, with sex characters, with race, nationality, and Islamophobia. And how those things are intersect, I think we need to look at it with through the lens of this racist idea that the healthy ideal body needs to conform to white and binary standards of beauty, of gender, of sex characters and health. And of course, here the racism also intersects strongly with Islamophobia and nationality, since Iman is a Muslim woman from Algeria, and has OII Europe previously declared in its statement, I think in August, this kind of gender tests that athletes are being subjected to in the sports disproportionately targets racialized women from Global South, and often due to the claims of Global North institutions. I think it's also valid to mention that this episode happened in France in a very specific context in French politics, after a very complicated, to don't say controversial, electoral process where migration and Islamophobia were definitely a central relevant topic. So I will stop because it was not easy to encompass all of this, but just bring the elements that I think are important to start the debate. And if there are more issues, I'm glad to discuss in the next round or even in the debate. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Rodrigo. Could you stop sharing your screen?
Yes. Thanks.
Perfect.
For
Thank you very much. I mean, you mentioned a lot of important points now, especially also with the Olympics and the intersectionality of also the different forms of discrimination. It's like misogyny, transphobia, interphobia, but also racism and Islamophobia. It was, yeah, so I would say people took everything and really made the best out of this discrimination case. Urs, speaking about Olympics and about this case, but also especially on since how many years you are also working on these topics. Can you share some examples of misinformations on intersex inclusion in sport? And if it's okay to add a little bit, we heard about like the sport testing thing. Maybe you can also explain how much discrimination or violation actually that is for trans and intersex people in sport, like the sport testing rules.
Okay, thank you, Luan. After what Rodrigo just explained, I don't have to talk about boxes anymore, I guess. That's what I actually wanted to do. But there's one very important point about Imane and Lin, which is the misinformation about those two boxers. Also, a lot of that misinformation comes from lack of information. What I realized is when the cases came up, first, the media were like jumping on the subject and just distributing like information they got from wherever they got the information from. So the first information was Iman is transgender. It's a lie. Then came the information about Imane, where she competed before, why she was thrown out of FIBA, and all those information. They came like bit by bit, correcting the first information given about Imane and Lin Yin. And that's like a pattern we have to live with. The information is so bloody fast these days that anybody is like on social media, the media themselves, they just jump on a subject and they write something. And then we fight with the problem that we have journalists dealing with those subjects that change from day to day. So if you take like written media or television or whatever, there's one journalist talking about the boxing subject. Next day, it's a second journalist, and the third day is a third journalist, and they all have different information. And it's like a mix up, and you get a cake that tastes very sweet, but is actually bitter when you eat it. So just to make clear, a lot of misinformation and disinformation comes from lack of information. And that is one really big problem the intersex community is fighting with. People do not have a clue what it means to be intersex all over the world. I mean, there's countries where it looks like better, and there's countries where it looks like really shit. But on the whole, the information is not where it should be. And it's part of our activist work to give this information. And it's like, I have said that millions of times, it's like fighting windmills. And many activists give up because they don't see, they get frustrated and it doesn't work and nothing is happening. And the politicians are just like not interested in our problems, etc. We have to keep on fighting and fight misinformation with information, correct information, and do not give up. It's what I just wrote in the chat this morning. That's basically the important thing we have to do. And that's what I'm doing in sports, actually. The sports bodies who came up with the rules for transgender and intersex athletes, they have their experts, and their experts are paid by the sports bodies. That's one fundamental problem. Those experts will always expertise whatever the sports bodies want them to expertise. And to fight against that is basically absolutely impossible. They have lots of money, they have a lot of weight, they have big voices, and as Rodrigo said, it's old white guys from the global north making rules for the whole world. And the most athletes affected are coming from the global south, where they don't have the means, they don't have the financial backgrounds, they don't have the manpower or woman power behind them to fight against those sports bodies. Costa did. She is fighting. The case is still pending. We hope it's going well. We don't know yet. If she wins that very last case on the High Court, then we have a really good basis to fight against the sports bodies. What we need, though, is we need independent experts coming from outside that can judge what does a human body look like. What's the difference of a human body, of an intersex body, of a transgender body after hormone treatments, just stuff like that. And they have to be independent, and they have to come out with statements like one expert panel from, I think it was Brighton University at the beginning of the year, came up with that testosterone, for instance, is not the main reason why those athletes should have an advantage to other women or other men even. So coming back to Iman and Lynn and the misinformation or the lack of information, and what it means also for other athletes, you can basically not do anything against what is happening on the internet, what is happening on social media, and what the media does, because they're too fast, and the world today is too fast. And there's one more problem: what is on the internet stays on the internet, and everybody can read and everybody can comment. And if you read like what people commented after that scandal in Paris with the two boxers, like people like you and me who read on Facebook, who read in digital media about those boxers, and then they comment like, yeah, there shouldn't be allowed, they're men and not women and stuff. It's all the same narrative all over again and again and again. And you cannot stop that. It's absolutely impossible. And that's why I say we have to come out with real funded information about us again and again and again and again. I'm doing that on a level that I try to teach the sports bodies. Look, what your experts tell about our bodies is just bullshit, because we have proof that testosterone is not the only reason. We have proof that biomechanics in a human body are more important than testosterone, for instance. We have to prove that not one intersex body looks like they're not all the same. It depends on your variation, all stuff like that. And when you have experts that say, okay, there is intersex people, they produce more testosterone than normal, so they're not allowed to start. Okay. It's just fight and do not stop. I give you, because time is limited, and I could talk like hours about sports, you know that. Luan knows that, because in Paris we talked about, I don't know, hours about that subject. There's one good example I can give you, and it's a little bit away from sport, but it has an effect on sports. You know that Switzerland, Nemo, won the European Song Contest this year. That opened a big debate in Switzerland about the third gender marker, which we don't have. We're fighting for, but our government doesn't want that. So after Nemo and his press conference and telling them he wants to talk to our Bundesrat, that's one part of the 7 guys that rule this country, about that subject. They initiated like panels in the government discussing non-binary issues. Now, the media, we're back to the media and the social media. The media jumped on the subject, of course. Does Switzerland need a third gender marker now? Because Nemo won the Eurovision Song Contest. And I, as an intersex activist and representing Interaction, the Swiss intersex organization, I was contacted like 1 million times by media, by television, by radio. They said, what do you think about the third gender marker? Because you have the same problem, don't you? It gave me the opportunity to go out on panels in television, radio, in the media, giving interviews, telling them, look, non-binary is not the same as intersex is, okay? There are variations of sex characteristics, that's intersex, and that's something that has to do with your body. And there is non-binary, which is a gender identity. It's completely different. Now, that's 4 or 5 months later, the whole Switzerland, whenever they talk about LGBTIQ problems, they include intersex people, because intersex people became more visible after the ESC. So actually, Nemo was like a very important event this year to help intersex people in Switzerland and the community get more and more visible and bring people to talk about them. It did not change the narrative in certain corners about LGBTIQ and intersex people. It just made us more visible and gave us the opportunity to go out and explain, to talk about the subjects and stuff like that. Coming back to the sports problem, that's exactly what we actually need in sports. We have one person, which is our, like, I don't know, our leader in the fight, which is Costa Semenya. Her fight for her rights is actually leading the activism for intersex rights in sports. But we need more, you know. Costa, I don't think she will, even if she wins, she's going to compete at the next Olympics, for instance. But we have other intersex athletes that competed in Olympics before, could not compete in Paris this year because they changed the rules, but might have the opportunity to compete in Los Angeles. We don't know. But we need more athletes taking the sports bodies to court, and that is very, very difficult. So what I do is, in the Iman and Lin case, for instance, the FIBA, that's the World Boxing Association, sits in Switzerland, in Lausanne. I tried to talk to them, which was not possible, of course. With FIBA, you have to know that the president is Russian. They're absolutely corrupt from A to Z. And they didn't, we have no idea what kind of tests they made. Unless Iman or Lin would tell us what kind of tests they did, which they don't, so they didn't so far. We still try to bring them to testify, but it's not simple. Then we have other sports. I also talked to IOC, which sits in Lausanne as well, and I could talk to the IOC about the subject because there's one very interesting thing in the Iman and Lin subject at the Olympics. When the subject came up, the IOC made a press conference, and in the press conference they stated those two girls were born women, they were raised as women, and they are women, period. So for us, they're allowed to compete. Had the IOC done that in the case of Costa Semenya, Francine Niyonzaba, and other intersex athletes as well, I know what the reaction of world athletics would have been. Okay, but they came out here. They could come out because FIBA does not make the rules for the boxing events at the IOC, because the IOC doesn't acknowledge FIBA as the sports body who can organize the boxing events at the IOC. That's the IOC itself that does it. So maybe a solution can be that the IOC comes out one of these days and says, okay, we do our, they would have to go a step or two back before they made the guidelines in 2021. They would have to say, okay, it's not fair. Those women are all women. We're talking about intersex athletes now. They're all women. They were born women. They were raised as women. They always competed as women. And we do that for all the sports at the Olympics. Be it athletics, soccer, whatever, okay? That would mean all of a sudden, all the intersex athletes could compete again. And it would be very interesting. It's not going to happen. Let's be straight and frank, it won't happen. But we have a very good example here that the IOC still has some competence, and that the guidelines they made in 2021, they are good. There's just one fundamental problem in there, in those guidelines. It says now it's up to the sports bodies themselves to put up rules according to our guidelines, which the sports bodies, being associations, private associations, not paying taxes, making a lot of money, absolutely corrupt from A to Z, all of them, just took as a chance, okay, we can make the rules. We don't want LGBTIQ people competing, so let's make rules accordingly. To sum up,
thank you very much, Urs.
Just a little, one word. To sum that up, we just started the fight, and we'll see where we going, but we're not giving up.
That's the most important thing. Thank you very much. We will not give up. We definitely won't do that. And yeah, we had a lot of discussions already about that, and I hope we will have more because it's a very important topic. And Matt, Urs already spoke a little bit about media and social media and things, what happened and can we change something or can we not change something? As far as I know, OII France made a amazing press toolkit or press kit, especially for the Olympics. So I would be really happy if you could share a little bit about your, first of all, a little bit on the press kit. How did you do it and how did it work out in the end? But also, I do know you also work a lot with misinformation on social media and things like that. So also this that part, what is your experience on social media, especially with misinformations?
Yes. Okay. So yes, thank you for the introduction. So talking about sports, we knew it was going to be a big topic this year because of the 2024 Olympics and Paralympics, especially here in France. And we analyzed that the two main battlefields of anti-gender movement are currently the question of children and of sportswomen. So we kind of anticipated the need for strong content around the Olympics. And we were expecting some sportswomen to be harassed because they were or were perceived as intersex, but we actually more expected that in athletics. So not especially in boxing, but well, the work was done, so we used it, of course. And the idea here with the start of my presentation is to give you a bit of feedback and also an insight of some tools we used in order to manage a bit the information and the media campaign surrounding the Olympics. So we developed a campaign on the topic since April with researchers and journalists reviewing the first drafts we did. So the collaboration was with researchers and specialists of sex testing in sports, because we knew some of specialists on this subject. And the initial target audience was sport press and also feminist-oriented newspaper. So we really wanted to have both the general sport press covering the events and also the more feminist press to be aware of the subject. And the press kit was released early June, so 1 month before, so 1.5 months before the start of the Olympics. And it was covering various issues and also common misconceptions related to intersex and trans inclusivity in sports. So we put in there, with also the advice of the journalist who revised the first draft, some basic definitions, a bit of the basic definition of what intersexuation is. Also, we put some stakes, some portraits of intersex sportswomen, of famous ones. So, of course, Caster Semenya, but also other sportswomen. Example of federation rules and the way it's applied as the moment, and alternative propositions for sports categories. So we put all of that in in a really beautiful press kit, and we accompanied this press kit with also printed flyers for distribution. Sorry, for example, at Pride March during the month of June in France, it's Pride Month like everywhere else, but we have a lot of March, and we intended to raise awareness at this moment. And we also launched a social media campaign. So to have a more general and simplified material available for everybody. So unfortunately, as Rodrigo mentioned, because of the political crisis at that time, the campaign did not get a lot of attention. But we were able to reactivate it at the beginning of the Olympics with one post each day during the games. And this helped us jumping back on the topic when the hate speech against boxers started. So during this period, OII France received a really numerous solicitation from French media covering the events with basically little to no previous knowledge on such topics. And the press kits really helped us and allowed us to save energy a lot and to be able to react really quickly by sending it to the journalists. Many media, shared directly parts of the press kit or the social media directly as quotes from us without us having to engage or interact directly with them. We did also answer the international press agency AFP, so Agence France Presse. So it's really the main press agency in France, which allowed our content to be shared even more widely. And as more general and traditional media in France started to work to talk about the boxers, the AFP really helped us to just push our voices and our knowledge really higher and to have a really bigger diffusion. The press kits also allowed us to choose our priorities in terms of engagement and to choose really which media we were willing to spend some time on and which we estimated weren't worthy of it and could just go with the press kit as it was. And we also use it a lot when being challenged on social media, since there was a lot of resource in it. So about the misinformation we had to face at that time, and so the harassment and hate speech against the boxers Iman Khalif and Ling Yuting during the Olympics was the occasion for lots of misinformation about intersex topics. And this was even more, so this was also a bit reactivated during the Paralympics because there were, so there was not transgender women athletes in the Olympics, but there was one of them during the Paralympics. And it was not focused on the intersex issue, but the misinformation campaign restarted a bit during the Paralympics because of that, but we were less concerned directly because we were more working on intersex issues. But the example we saw during the Olympics, we have put them in 5 categories, and some of them are misinformation, and some of them are disinformation, as per Rodrigo explained in his presentation. So the first one and the more common one is the oversimplification of the concept of so-called biological sex, with comments such as, but it's easy to know, women have XX and men have XY, and that's it. And usually with this I know everything tone, it's called basic biology and things like that. The same is going sometimes with gonad or internal organs that would prove sex. So everybody has their own simply biologic facts, but it's not the same for everyone, but it's the same method every time. And this usually is misinformation. Something that was also really present a lot was the idea that testosterone is a male and male only hormone that only men produce, and that the idea that a higher level of testosterone will indicate that a woman is actually not a real woman or a man or hiding something. And really related to that, the idea that testosterone is like a magic potion, ensuring dominance in any sports. People with higher levels of testosterone would have an unfair advantage in comparison with endosex sports women, who are perceived also as weak and fragile. So you have also your misogyny here. And women with higher levels of testosterone undergo a masculinizing puberty that gives them a lot of physical advantages. So always the same idea that testosterone is really a magical potion and only for men. Another type of disinformation this time was that intersex sports women are intentionally coming into women's sports to rob endosex women from victories, because it's easier and linked with the idea that they could and should compete in men's category. And the last one is the denial of how common intersex is. So intersex people are perceived as an extremely rare minority, under 1% of the population, things like that. People always tend to have magical statistics coming, you know from where. And so their needs should not be a priority, and they don't deserve fairness, basically. So that's really the type of misinformation and disinformation we had to face during the Olympics. And in the media, in the traditional French media, thanks to the press kit and thanks to the AFP dépêche, we avoided, I think, most of this misinformation to be really shared widely. But on social media and in the comments and the videos and things like that, it was really more difficult because we just don't have the number to reply to everybody and also don't have the energy to do that. So the press kits was more useful and really more used for traditional media, mostly journalists and press. But for the social media, it's becoming more complicated to control and to raise awareness in this field.
Thank you so much. I think, I think it is you had an incredible idea to do this press kit. I think it's really, really great. And Loe was already so nice and translated the flyer into English. And I think a lot of us intersex organizations from us, we were really we were hit by that, and because we all had a lot of media coming to us and so on and so on, and some of us do have also personal experience with sport and with things like that. So it really, it's a perfect tool, and we should, by the next Olympics, all of us should think to do something like that before. So yeah, thank you very much. So we heard now a lot, especially on the topic of sport. And now I would like to invite you, Michael, for the next question. So what are the human rights violations at the UN Human Rights Office sees what intersex people in sport, but also like in the medical setting and other areas face? And how does this, what do you think? How does this connect with the topic of misinformation?
Thanks so much, Luan, and thanks so much to Rodrigo, Urs, and Matt. I'm going to try to add new things. They have already said a lot. Look, I'm not going to talk too much about the violations because everyone here is familiar with them already, and we've already discussed them both in the medical settings and in the sports settings. But in terms of some of the misinformation and disinformation that we see, also from our work at the UN, we're going to delve into some of them. I think everyone is familiar with them. But for example, in the medical setting, it's denial, right? It's just a few cases. This is what happened before. It doesn't happen anymore. So I think a lot around the denying the reality of the violations in medical settings in the first place. Then another category is really, well, human rights standards are not relevant here. No, this is about medical field. It should be addressed by doctors, medical discussions. So the human rights standards don't apply or are not relevant here. Of course, this is complete nonsense. There's constantly human rights discussions about what happens in medical settings. The rights of women and girls, racism, sexual reproductive health and rights, degrading and humiliating treatment, forced sterilization, treatment of persons with disabilities in health settings. I could go on and on and on. Issues of accountability for human rights violations in medical settings. So the issues that intersex people raise about treatment in medical settings are not unique, right? But the argument, the misinformation, the narratives that intersex people face when they raise these issues are, no, this is human rights does not belong here. The other area, of course, is all these interventions are necessary for medical reasons or they are urgent, right? And of course, intersex organizations and human rights defenders have been, calling out this misinformation, disinformation for decades. And I think the recent, there was a recent study by the World Health Organization that actually looked at, the last decades of medical journals on this topic, and they really did an analysis of all the rationales, and they said, no, these are either there's no rationales, or this is based on desires of parents, or stress of parents, or desires of doctors, but nothing to do with the rights of the health of the child, and not supported by evidence, right? And so this is, again, these are some examples of the narratives of misinformation and disinformation. In sports, of course, again, people have already discussed all the human rights violations that have been documented there: intrusive, humiliating tests, sterilization, medical malpractice, surgeries without consent or information, coerced administration of hormones, discriminatory policies that force people to choose between their careers or their physical integrity, public humiliation, hate speech, violations of privacy. So as emphasized by Urs already, a lot of assertions are not based on evidence, right? Or they're based on very contested evidence that is produced often by entities, organizations that have very strong links to the sports governing bodies that are making that are developing the regulations. Again, same as in the medical settings, narratives that human rights don't apply in sports, right? The only thing that matters in sports is the independence of sports bodies and fairness. Everything else is not relevant or important. And then fairness is understood in a very, very, very narrow way, right? Some things are about fairness, other things are not about fairness. There's so much hate speech and disinformation in the media, right? And especially on social media. And I think Matt just emphasized, what we saw in the recent Olympics. I think we also see not only a lack of understanding or awareness about intersex persons, but I think it's more than that. I think, and we saw it in the recent Olympics, is really instrumentalizing hate against transgender persons, against intersex persons, right? And so really, and what we really see, I think, with the anti-gender movement is really this push to divide people, divide human rights movements, create situations where people are competing or fighting for human rights, about whose human rights is more important. So we really try to see, especially in the feminist and women's rights movements, try to pit the rights of one group against the other and try to undermine overall human rights movements. I think what we also see very strongly in sports is the narratives that this is necessary to protect the rights of women and girls, when in fact, these policies are some of the most anti-women policies. In fact, all women, as a result of these policies, all women are subject to scrutiny. All women are subject to scrutiny of their bodies, of their appearance, based on very sexist, but also racist stereotypes about who is a woman and who is not a woman. And it, really going backwards in this sense. And it is interesting because last year I was listening to a panel of women athletes, older women athletes who were also, some of them were lesbian, and some of them were recalling the conversations around women's sports and athletes in the 80s or 70s or 80s, when there was more visibility. They started to have more visibility around, lesbian women or bi women. And you saw a lot of the similar narratives, the similar kind of hateful narratives around, the dangers to women's sports if, lesbian women were allowed to play, lots of stereotypes around, femininity and masculinity and who fits within stereotypes. And so what they were saying is that in some ways, some of the conversations today, whether it is around women with innate variations in their sex characteristics who are in sports or trans women, really echo for them the same narratives that have just been recycled, repackaged, and are being targeted against now a new group, a new target in that way. I think what's also interesting is that, these policies subject women to humiliating and degrading tests, but no man is ever subjected to any kind of test. So men who have physical differences that can be linked to sports performance are applauded. They are elevated, they are seen as exceptional, they are wonderful. For them, it enhances masculinity. So if you have some kind of differences that enhances your sports performance, that means that you are seen as more masculine and you are applauded, right? And so these policies are deeply, deeply sexist. They reinforce harmful gender stereotypes, but it is all done in the name of the rights of women and girls. So I think that is really challenging to challenge, because a lot of this uses the narratives, use the framing of the rights of women and girls to advance deeply sexist policies that are against the rights of all women and girls. But I think this doesn't. It's hard to challenge because people are afraid. They say this is a threat to women and girls. People are afraid. They react very kind of emotionally, and they don't look at the evidence. They don't look at the what's behind that. I think another point which was raised by both Urs and Matt is really there's so much inequality in the world of sports, right? But the conversations around fairness are so narrow, right? So all the Court of Arbitration of Sports has acknowledged that there are hundreds of physical, cultural, social, economic factors that link to sports performance. So if you really cared about fairness in sport, you would be looking at, how do we create a fair system that, takes into account all of these people's differences, all of these circumstances, and how that impacts on performance. But what you see is that people are not really interested in that. They're only focusing on one variable based on contested or controversial evidence, and they ignore all the rest. And so that is both hypocrisy, right? That means that you don't really care about fairness in sport. You're really only looking at trying to exclude some people. But it's also discrimination, right? If you're going to look at fairness and performance, you need to look at all the criteria, the way that they affect all sorts of people. If you're only looking at one very small thing against one very small group, then you really then this is really discrimination. I think another challenge with misinformation, disinformation is a subset of what I mentioned around narratives around the rights of women and girls, which is narratives around violence against women and girls. And I think that really came out in the Olympics, right? Some of the narratives were around, this is dangerous, right? So this is the narrative around the Iman Khelif and the Italian boxer who kind of stopped the fight. You know, her life was at risk, right? And so it's really using narratives of violence against women and girls, right? Which is a horrific pandemic that is affecting the whole world, every country in the world, and is you know, we see it every day. And they're using this narrative to say, oh, women with innate variations in sex characteristics in sports are dangerous, right? So it's not just that it's unfair, it's that they are dangerous to other women in sports. And they're really weaponizing it. It's not only based on gross disinformation, right? But it has very real consequences, right? And we saw it in the level and the depth of the hateful comments that Iman Khelif and the boxer from Taiwan faced. But it also means that all women who don't fit stereotypes are a target, right? And so we're seeing more and more reports of women who, for some reason, don't fit the standard around femininity, often like white femininity. They are targeted and they are seen as a threat, and they are attacked, whether it's in bathrooms or elsewhere. And this is causing violence, right? So this narrative that is framed in terms of protecting women and girls from violence is really manipulative, and it's actually creating violence in the real world, right? Both online but also offline. And we've seen how it's particularly deployed again against women from Africa and from Asia specifically, right? And we've seen it in athletics, we see it now in boxing, and we see it elsewhere. I think one also aspect of misinformation, disinformation, which is tricky, is that many of these women athletes don't describe themselves as intersex, right? They say, you know, some of them may say, well, I'm different. Most of them say, I'm a woman. I think Caster Semenya is really interesting in that way. And so I think when communicating around this, you know, the importance of respecting how people identify and the words that they use to describe themselves, but also addressing the issues. And with media that just wants to have, you know, like easy formulas to talk about. There's so much more to say. I think you know, Matt has already mentioned you know, maybe another thing is just we've seen strong recommendations now, and this is important because what we saw, both Urs and Matt, you mentioned the Olympic Committee was actually quite strong in the boxing. So they stood up for the women boxers, but they're on the back foot. And there's a strong push now to go back to sex testing. So as Urs said, you know, they came up with new regulations. The boxing at the Olympics was a bit of an exception. The Olympics never organizes sports competitions. So this was an exception. But now there's a strong push for sex testing. So the misinformation is also that sex testing is harmless. Oh, you just need to have a cheek swab and that's all that needs to happen. But what we've seen time and time again is that, well, first of all, the cheek swab is only available in some contexts. In many other contexts, women are forced to undergo nude parades. You know, they are examined often by men doctors, you know, who examine their genitals. You know, or in contexts where there is the cheek swab. Well, if the cheek swab is positive, what happens then? There's no care. It's not about medicine. It's not about the rights and well-being of the person. Yeah, maybe I'll stop there. But yeah, these are some of the examples of misinformation or disinformation that we've faced and we've seen.
Thank you so much, Michael. We have 9 minutes left, so we do have some more questions. But just to sum it up, we have heard it is a lot. I would say, yeah, it's we still need to fight against the patriarchy. I think that's the most important thing we need to do. But also, especially with this being instrumentalized. I don't know if I pronounced that correctly, but also like all this. What do you think? Can we change the narrative? Can we stop it? or what do we need to do? So just a quick question to all of you on the panel. If somebody wants to jump in with an answer, just do it. We have 7 more minutes.
I would like to jump in with one very important subject which we did not discuss right now. All those rules, all those disinformations, the hate speech, everything, it also affects and mainly affects young people, children. Intersex kids, transgender kids, they will not do any sports where they have no perspective of doing any sports at elite level. They will stop that immediately. So it keeps, and that's against the Olympic Charter, just basically, which says everybody is eligible to do any sports. That's one very important thing. I mean, the kids,
Absolutely. Yeah.
the kids are the athletes of the future. And if you just we're talking about roughly 5% of people living on this planet. Okay, when we talk about transgender and intersex people, that means 5% of the people on this planet will never be able to do any competitive sports if it continues. And there's other sports bodies which will come up with the rules. And before I stop that, I want just to give you, I don't know if you all know that, the latest sports body to have rules against transgender and intersex athletes is the World Chess Federation. Okay, I leave it there.
Yeah.
I don't comment that. Just tell me
we had
where
a
the
discussion
advantage.
about them in Paris.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's so weird.
Just it looks like a fun fact, but it's not funny actually.
Thank you, Rodrigo.
So I'll try to be very quick. It was part of what I was supposed to talk in the end of my intervention, but I knew I was running out of time. I didn't want to be so inconvenient, so I decided to not finish my intervention with responses, actions, solutions. How could we fight against disinformation, misinformation, gender disinformation, female targeting, LGBTIQ, whatever. I think that there are lots of types of responses that are available. We can talk about capacity building, raising awareness, building a more resilient and solitary movement. But I also invite all of you to be critical about those responses that are available, because in the end of the day, has civil society, has social movements, there are not a lot of things that we can do. We also need to fight for regulation, need to fight for regulation that is sensitive to intersex issues, to trans issues, LGBTI issues, gender issues in general. It's the role of state and authorities to regulate the mess that became the information environment nowadays. This has everything to do with the business model of social media platforms, because disinformation is nothing new. It has always been there. But now it became much more easy to spread disinformation at a global scale. And LGBTIQ issues, and now we are seeing that intersex issues specifically is a very Jewish topic that engage people, that allow this kind of content to become very popular, very catching, very engaging. And this is what gives money to these companies. To companies, I'm not going to cite, it's going to be available online after. We know the big techs we are talking about, they're making money with hate against LGBTIQ people. And this is what we need to address politically. That's what we need to do. I thank you very much again for the opportunity to participate and to hear to this amazing panel.
Thank you. Thank you, Rodrigo. Michael, quick one. Then we.
So really, really quick, I would like to add also another key aspect for us. So at OII France, but I think that can be shared more widely, is also to build more alliances with the general feminists movement and the general LGBTQI plus movement. For example, during the Olympics, the most relayed quote in medias was so in French medias was about that intersexophobia in sports is misogynistic. So we try to make a link between intersexophobia and sexism and the way womanhood is perceived. So that's the more of the discourse and the symbolic aspects, but we have also more concrete alliances being built by being proactive with trainings. So we have a lot of huge training program for queer feminist organizations, but also for psychologists and healthcare specialists. And we even created during the election crisis an LGBTA coordination at national level in France. And by having a leadership role in this movement, it's making us, so the OII France, a key actor, and the intersex issues are then unmissable because we are really at the center of the LGBTI coordination, so for France scale. So those are also some ways, some strategies from our side to how to fight against the anti-gender movement, which is really raising more awareness and making more alliances inside the feminist and queer organizations and community.
Thank you very much. Michael, do you have to add something?
Not much, just to really emphasize that last point made by Matt in terms of alliances. This is bigger than any single movement. No one can fight this alone. So it really requires, not just within the human rights movements, but trying to find the alliances with as many institutions as possible across topics, as Rodrigo said, also with people who are, fighting for regulation of the social media space. This is bigger and more of a challenge for all of us. So we need to really work together to counter it.
Thank you so much to all of you. And we even managed it. It's three. Thank you, everybody. We sadly don't have time for questions from the audience and also don't have time for other points from the audience. But thank you very much. Also, thank you very much for listening and also for sharing in the chat. We really appreciate it. And now I give back to Irene.
Thank you so much, Luan. Yeah, I apologize that we don't have more time. I saw more hands being raised, but we certainly don't have more time today. If you are joining the community event this weekend, it would be fantastic to continue the conversation with you. I want to once again thank you so much. Big thank you to all our panelists, to all our participants. Big thank you to you, Luan. Big thank you to all of my colleagues, everyone involved in organizing today's event. Thank you so much to our awareness team, to all the participants, to everyone who has been here. It's been an honor to listen to all of you, and I just want to wish you all a great rest of your day and a great weekend. Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you, everyone. Thanks so much, all. Bye. Thank you all.